The following feature presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to this bonus episode of Star Warsologies, the podcast about science and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. This time, though, we're not talking about Star Wars at all. Instead, we're sharing the audio from our LA Comic-Con panel titled Coraline and the Nightmare Before Christmas, Behind-the-Scenes Stories. It included people who worked on the movies to build the sets, design, characters, and so much more. And if you want to see all of the slides and amazing images that we shared at LA Comic-Con, those are available on our YouTube page matched up with this episode. As you can hear, we had some trouble with the visuals in the room, but I'm excited to share them all with you now. Okay, while we figure out the AV, I'm going to at least have my panelists start telling stories and introduce themselves, and then hopefully miraculously the slides with all the awesome photos and stuff like that will appear. Sorry about this, everyone. I ran a panel in here 2 hours ago, no problem. So we're going to get it figured out. My name is Melissa Miller. I'm a science writer based in San Diego and have been working with Fon on a bunch of panels and stuff like that and just love behind-the-scenes content. So why don't you guys go down the line, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role on each of these movies.
My name is Fon Davis. I run Fonco Studios here in Los Angeles. We do all kinds of weird stuff, a lot of miniatures and things like that, based on the fact that I worked on movies like Nightmare and Coraline. On Nightmare Before Christmas, I was a miniature set builder, but I also got to work in a lot of other departments because I would offer myself up whenever our department was slow. So it was a really great experience. And then on Coraline, I was in the art department, so I did a lot of the design work for the real and other world architecture, so a lot of the Pink Palace interiors and exteriors. And the portal.
I'm Jorgen Klubien, and I'm a storyboard artist. And I came to this country in '78 from Denmark, and went to Cal Arts on an invitation from the Disney Studios. And then I was an animator, and I worked in comics also. And then Nightmare Before Christmas was my first storyboard gig, and so that was a thrill. And then I went into more boarding on a lot of animated movies and also writing. So I live here in Glendale, California.
My name is Kirk Scott. I worked on Night Before Christmas as a production assistant. A lowly position, starter position. It was my first film too. Was it your first film as well?
First film, yeah, first feature film.
Strange. But I started actually off as an office PA on that for a couple of months until they realized close to the end of production that we needed to actually get the film done and delivered. So I got moved down to the stages to help out Rob Anderson as the stage manager, and worked with another a friend of mine, Dave Jansen, was the real two stage PAs on that. From that project, went and worked for Disney on Dinosaur, a few other projects there, worked on Monkey Bone with Henry, and then ended up moving to Portland to work on Coraline in 2006, and I was the stage manager on that. So I got to help set up that facility initially, and spent about 2.5, 3 years making that project and ordering a lot of expendables. Anyway, that's what I did then. So.
All right, well, until we have our slideshow up and running, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what stands out the most from working on this set. I mean, Fon, I know your career generally is miniatures and stuff like that, so maybe not super different from other films for you, but what was different about this?
Oh, well, for Nightmare Before Christmas, I think the most unique thing was Henry Selick, the director, had a really great vision for the movie. He did not want to use compositing or any kind of visual effects, those types of visual effects, nothing contemporary. So everything we did in the movie was all traditional in-camera visual effects. So, for example, if we needed a candle on a desk, they would shoot Jack at his desk, do all the stop motion, and then they'd have to rewind the film, put up a piece of black velvet, align a candle with the flame where his candle would be on his desk, and then they would shoot on the same piece of film to get the fire for his candle. So it was that kind of really traditional stuff, and all the stop motion. There was a lot of really just great traditional techniques for special effects. So it was a great foundation for the whole rest of my career, because everything else was using compositing and blue screen and stuff at the time. So it was pretty unique.
Yeah. So, Jorgen, what was different about storyboarding for something like Claymation versus the other projects you later worked on?
Well, like I said, Nightmare was my first storyboarding gig, and I actually I had been an animator, and I knew Henry and Tim Burton and Rick Heinrichs from CalArts. And I had worked on Fox and the Hound, where a lot of us got hired in the late 70s. You know, that was sort of a transitional picture for the younger generation. But so anyway, Henry wanted Zero to be animated on paper, and then he wanted to reverse or not. He wanted to use the negative film, so that and so I was hired to do that job. So initially we sat out at Phil Tippett's, I think it was in Emeryville.
Yep.
He had a shop out in Emeryville, and we were doing a test. What do you call it? A look test of the film, and it was where Jack is shot out of the sky and lands on a little angel statue in the cemetery. But I sat up there in Phil Tippett's office, and it was very low budget, so I had an upside-down waste paper basket to sit on, and I was supposed to animate Zero, thinking that everything I drew was going to be white and reverse. So it was a brain twist for me, and I tried animating Zero on paper, and eventually Henry was like, "Jorn, I thought you were a good animator." I was like, "Yeah, but Henry, I have a hard time seeing this in my mind." But anyway, I tried, and but we gave up on it. And luckily for me, Henry decided to shoot Zero as a puppet, but with these mirrors, so that he became. You can probably explain that better than me, but it was shot next to the scene.
Yeah, it was called a beam splitter.
Yes.
So what they would do is they would shoot, say, Jack straight ahead in front of the camera with a piece of glass set at an angle next to Jack, or in between the camera and Jack. And then they would put Zero against a black piece of velvet off to the side. And so depending on how much light you put on Zero, the reflection would go more opaque or more translucent. So it could have that ghostly look. So they would actually animate Zero off to one side and then Jack straight ahead. And the reflection is actually what you saw of Zero to get the ghost effect. So it's called Pepper's Ghost.
So it was great for me because it then freed me up. And I had, at the outset, I said I would love to, when I'm done animating Zero, if I could get a chance to try to storyboard on the film. But then now, suddenly, I was available to board on the whole film. And we were basically just three guys for the majority of the film. It was Joe Ranft and Mike Catuela and myself who boarded most of the film. Then Bob Pauly came in a little bit, and Mike Mitchell also, and might have been Steve Moore did a little.
Was Kendall?
Kendall was in the art part.
Okay.
Yeah. But at any rate, it was a fun job to board, and it's something I had wanted to do for a long time. And when I got into boarding, it was where we were writing the material as we drew. And so that was the fun part of it. And,
Yeah, they actually called it story department because they wouldn't just draw scenes from the movie. They would also create gags and come up with ideas as they were illustrating.
Yeah, we basically didn't have a script in the beginning. We had an outline from Tim, and we had the songs coming in. There were 10 or 11 songs that Tim and Danny Elfman worked out, so we could board the songs, but all the material to connect the songs, we had to sort of try to come up with stuff, and that's a fun part of it. And we all sat in one big room above where the sets were being made and shot downstairs. So it was just one fun big building, and a very low budget, like I said, but a very communal atmosphere, and a lot of fun was had.
Yeah, there was only 200 people on the crew. When you look at movies now, there's thousands of people to make a movie. And they got 200 of us. A lot of us, it was our first feature film, and they locked us in a building 50 hours a week or more for about 2.5 years.
Well, and that was actually the real treat of it. I think it was actually kind of a matter of course, just for financing at the time. But the fact of the matter is that we shot pretty much everything was done under one roof. So we had everything from the story department to editorial and post, to everybody making the sets, some small VFX. We did do a couple of things out of house, right? Didn't Harry Walton do a couple of miniature effects, maybe, or some process projector work, or I don't know. But most of it was done in house. And we did have Buena Vista Visual Effects, who had just kind of started out, add a couple of elements. The snow falling at the end, the actual snow flakes falling in the sky, and then the snowflakes when Jack's going down the tree to Christmas Town. He's kind of got that spiral going on around him. But and between that and then actually some 2D effects, because Mike Cotruela animated Oogie's silhouette.
That's right.
In the moonlight.
Yes. And Gordon.
And Gordon Baker. Yeah.
Gordon Baker. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about having everybody all in one building is that. In the course of the day, you were able to communicate with every other department. You can kind of get an idea where they're at. If there were questions that came up, people can just kind of quickly run to each other and get an answer. It was, very organic in that sense, and created a whole sense of family on that project, unlike any other project I know that I've worked on. So,
yeah, it was definitely unique in that way. I've never worked on another project like it in that sense. We were really a tight-knit family. It was really fun.
Yeah.
That was probably, when people ask me, what is the best thing about that movie, it's the people. We just had a great time, and it was such a great creative team. And like Jorgen was just saying, we didn't have a clear plan at the beginning. We just shot all the musical numbers first, because we knew that we needed to get the music in the movie.
Yeah. We started with Christmas Town. I mean, after that look test we're done out at Phil Tippett's, the production moved into... I forget the street now,
but San Francisco Studios.
Yeah. It was the Skellington Studios, and it had been some kind of studio before.
It was a commercial and music video studio in San Francisco. We took over their building when they moved out.
Yeah, but it was just it was a great, unique experience, and also because we were funded by Disney, but it was going to be made under the label Touchstone. So Disney, they were very hands off, also because we were up north. And so we had this very almost CalArts feeling to it. It really felt like an independent film. And Henry Selick came from making commercials and independent filmmaking, so he had that independent film spirit. So it felt very hands off from the executives, which is why I think the film was allowed to be so unique. Yeah.
Yeah, we were that weird group in NorCal.
Before Pixar.
Yeah.
I feel like this movie has those vibes.
Yeah.
Is there anything spooky about it? If anyone's got a bug phobia or anything like that, was there anything that you had to work on and make, a whole bunch of, or storyboard or anything like that creeped you out?
Oh gosh, I don't know about creep. There was one scene that Disney got creeped out by. The original hockey scene where the vampires are playing hockey on the lake that freezes at the end of the movie wasn't a pumpkin. It was Tim Burton's head. And they'd actually shot it, and Disney was like, I don't think we could do that.
Tim was okay with it.
Tim was okay with it.
Yeah, Tim was okay with it.
That tracks.
There was one scene that Tim wasn't okay with, however, and that was towards the end of the film. Henry and us in the story department felt like we should try to connect the meaning a little bit about Oogie Boogie to integrate it into the story somewhat. So we came up with an idea of the evil scientist actually being inside of Oogie Boogie, and in one of the last shots, and one of the threads get caught in the that spinner, and then all the bugs come up, and he's standing in there with a little loudspeaker going, it's me, and Tim hated it. He said, no, I don't want it to make sense. No. So he totally shot it down, And it was that's Tim. He had, of course, a lot to do with it, even though he was down south working with Caroline Thompson mostly and Danny Elfman. And he came up a few times, though.
Jorgen, you mentioned that Christmas Town was sort of the first thing to be shot.
Yes.
Was that the first used storyboard? So, process here.
Yeah. I mean, I think Henry let's do. So the film was actually being made as we figured out the story, and so it had to. Often with animation, you're trying to get a sequence done in boarding and editing, and so you can move it down into production, so you can start building the sets and start animating and such. And so that was the first one that got okayed to go into production, also because it was kind of a separate piece, a standalone kind of sequence on its own. And those are some of my sketches there of the elves. And Henry tasked me with designing the elves. He went, "Jorgen, you're from over there in Denmark. You can you can do some elves, can't you?" And so I actually got a credit as a designer on the film, which is pretty unique. So I'm happy about that also. But yeah, I mean, so we did that first, and Joe and myself did a lot of that. Joe Raft, in particular, had a lot to do with boarding that, but I also helped out on that. So it was a fun sequence, yeah, standalone.
Yeah. And it's always fun for me to see, real life humans in the scale for these sorts of things. Fon, maybe you can talk a little bit about, was there just one set for each of these, or did you do different scales?
Oh, we worked in what was called puppet scale, because the puppets were all over the map in terms of how tall they would be in reality. So we would just created a thing called puppet scale, which ranged anywhere from 6 scale to quarter scale. Usually hands were quarter scale. That set actually is the very, very first shot that we did. It was the train coming out of the tunnel and Jack running over the hill and in front of the town there and hitting a pole. That's how there was a lot of challenges in figuring out how Jack would be able to run through snow. So we had to come up with a whole formula for putting a very light layer of plaster over that crunchy white foam. See those Christmas stuff is made, or craft stores have the kind of crystally styrofoam. That's what the snow was made of underneath, baking powder and paint and just a little bit of plaster. So when he would step in it, it would actually crush and stay crushed. So, yeah, it was really cool. And then they would fill any kind of rigging holes with clay, because the characters have to be tied down every time they run. In the snow, it worked out great because you couldn't see where, it would intentionally leave a footprint. So that was good.
Well, and then let's move into sort of characters here. We've got Jack and Sally. Is there anything, Jorgen, you can share with us about, were you involved in the design at all, or were those pretty much set?
You adapt a certain, your own drawing style to Tim's drawings. I could never draw exactly like Tim, but, these are my way of drawing them. And what I liked a lot about this film, I think, in retrospect, when I think about Nightmare and why it's become so popular, I actually think it's because it's a very romantic film. I mean, I know it appeals to goth and people feeling sort of outside the norm and all that, but at its core, I think it has a very sweet romance about this crazy dude who eventually finds happiness with a smart girl, And so I think that is at its core, and is unique in that sense that it's kind of old-fashioned. You don't think of Tim that way, but, he does get that kind of stuff. I think he has the same elements in Scissorhands and some of the other movies that he's done that I like, yeah.
And then moving that sort of into the sets, into the characters and stuff like that. Fon, you have some insights into what it takes. I know I've got some images here of all the different facial expressions and stuff like that it takes.
Oh yeah, they had a guy locked in a closet, literally in a closet, who would have a bunch of Jack heads. So they would sculpt different expressions, and he was tasked with figuring out which head goes to which scene for what mouth shape. There's 24 frames per second, so that was a full-time job for him to just figure those out, and then he would deliver the boxes of heads to the animators, and they would have them in order so they knew which one to put on next. And they would just pull it out of the box and put on the next one, so they didn't have to pay attention to that part of it, thanks to this guy in the closet.
I actually drew all those heads.
Did you?
Yeah, because I was an animator. Henry asked me to draw a whole bunch of different expressions, and then it was Randy Dutra who sat and sculpted them. Remember Randy?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And then what was his name who sat and did what you're saying from the computer?
Dan Mason.
It was Dan Mason, who did that. But so I had a lot to do with the faces of Jack, and I think in my drawings I put in teeth. and Rick Heinrichs, who's a great friend of mine and is in many ways Tim Burton's right-hand guy on a lot of projects, he once told me, I hated those teeth. And of course I kept shut about, yeah, me too. It's like, so I apologize for putting in teeth. I don't know if that was the idea from Tim's mind. I'm not sure.
I think some of those are actually in the Academy Museum here in LA, so that's pretty cool. Yeah, so in terms of the other puppets, I know I've got some images here, but the scale of the puppets was much different than I realized. I mean, that's part of movie magic, right? You don't really know the dimensions and stuff like that, but these look like, I don't know, sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of Barbie doll size for the most part.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, Jack was 12
he was
inches?
tall.
Or was he?
Well, he was
18?
17.
Because Oogie was bigger than him, and he was 18, right?
Yeah.
Or 20 almost?
Yeah. Jack was just really tall and skinny.
Yeah.
I think he scaled out to something like 8 feet if we were to use scale, and Sally was more traditional 6 scale.
Yeah.
But with tiny hands.
Yeah.
Actually, a funny tidbit on that is when they were designing, you have to put these metal skeletons inside the puppets so that you can make them posable color armatures. And for Sally, her ankles were so skinny that they couldn't design an armature strong enough to hold the whole puppet up. So that's why she has little socks around her ankles.
Well, and I know there's an image later when we get to Coraline for the other mother or whatever too. It's the same thing. They put little boots or something like that. Yeah. So that's
Henry likes small ankles.
Learn some things. So what are some other...
Freak.
Oh, wow. I was just about to ask about other memories from the early 90s, but here we go, Fon. Flashback Fon photo.
Yeah, that kind of says a lot of things there. That was my Jägermeister hat that I got free working. I actually had this is so funny. This is how little confidence I had in the future of my career in the film industry. I actually worked at a bar on the weekends, and I got the Jägermeister hat, which had a bill in the front and a bill in the back. And if you look at the making of stuff, you'll see, there it is. A friend of mine actually just bought me one of those on eBay a couple months ago. Like, they still have them out there. Yeah, so I worked in the mold room there, and I was also in the model shop making props. And I have the CP shirt is a Colossal Pictures shirt, which was where Henry Selick and I were working at before we went over to work on Nightmare Before Christmas. A lot of people came from Colossal Pictures, and then Disney down in Southern California, and then Phil Tippett's studio. It was
and ILM too. I mean,
and then Industrial Light and Magic. Right. So it was a great collection of talent. A lot of people just came off of Gumby as well. A lot of the animators and stuff.
Yeah.
Kirk, do you have any other strong memories of favorite sets or characters working on? I'm just sort of going to scroll through some of these. We have so many.
This was a kind of a whole happenstance for me. I had no desire to get into stop motion. I was 22. I think finally we were just kibitzing in the hallway. He beats me by a couple of months, but he was the youngest guy on the show, and I was the second youngest guy on the show. I'd been out of college for like a year, and I'd studied theater, which was going to be my passion in my career. In the meantime, I needed a job. So I moved to San Francisco, and I got on this project. And, I think it was just being able to walk around a facility that is surrounded with this kind of creativity going on was really kind of, the whole thing was just kind of mind-blowing to me. I really had no idea what I was getting into. 32 years later, I'm still doing it. So, what wasn't a bad choice in the end. But, yeah.
No, I'm curious if any of you have thoughts about that. The Nightmare Before Christmas and Coraline both are really beloved, sort of timeless movies at this point. Do you have any thoughts about? Do you have any feelings on set, like, oh, this one we're going to be talking about this on a panel in 30 years, or any thoughts on how that came about?
I think for a lot of the younger crew on Nightmare, we knew we had something. A, we had Tim Burton. B, we had Danny Elfman, which were both kind of part of the zeitgeist of the 80s, coming out of that. So, there was that kind of fun. I think the real advantage that we had, especially a lot of the folks that were coming from the ILM side and Tippett shop, is that those folks have been doing miniatures and doing effects for 10, 15 years at that point, but they're doing 20 shots in a film. They're doing effects for a certain part of a story. But for these people to then actually sink their teeth into a narrative from start to finish, I think it kind of gave everybody a chance to really flourish and do the things they wanted to and own sequences. So there was a sense of ownership I think we all took upon ourselves because we, for the first time, we're actually being able to do it at this scale.
Yeah, and Henry and actually every department had this really inclusive kind of calling to everyone who was working on the movie. Everyone could contribute. Everyone could come up with an idea, and it could end up in the movie, and a lot of them did. And I feel like you could see it in every scene in the movie. There's just it's so rich with just incredible work because everyone on the movie could say something. I remember I saw the test that they did over at Phil Tippett's. That was my first day on the show. We were just starting to set up San Francisco Studios building into Skellington Productions. And I went to screen the test shot, and I was sitting behind Henry Selick. He's the director of the movie. I never speak to directors. And we watched the test, and he talked to a couple people around him. And then he flipped around on his chair, looked right at me, and said, "What did you think, Fon?" And I was just like, "What? Why are you asking me?"
I hated it.
I hated it.
So, yeah, it was a really good vibe.
Do you have anything that you remember being particularly challenging about the production or the pre-production of Nightmare Before Christmas? Yes.
No, but a funny, to me, anecdote is when we were doing that look test, over at Phil Tippett's. It was an interesting time because it was right when computer animation was barely coming into being, and Phil Tippett had wanted to animate the dinosaurs in stop motion on Jurassic Park, and had just been turned down by Spielberg because he wanted to use CGI. And so Henry had rented the front office on this little soundstage where I was sitting over in the corner on a waste paper basket trying to do zeros. And Phil Tippett would walk through to his office in the back, super grumpy, and just hating on us because we had a production that was funded. So it was a weird dynamic that went on there, but eventually I think Phil Tippett found his place, and so I'm happy about that. But that was an interesting dynamic going on there.
I was happy to have a job. I was
well, I want to talk a little bit about Oogie Boogie's lair, since it's one of my favorite sequences. And also, there's just some odd pictures that you guys sent me about what is, and I'm sorry again to the room, but we can act it out. There's whatever this big sort of circular set is.
The roulette wheel.
Right, the roulette wheel that Fon is inside of, it looks like. And then at some point there are people blowing or sucking into what look like hookah pipes. Tell us a little bit about why that is necessary.
You want to talk about the construction of the set?
Or you should tell them about why. You have to explain this picture.
Okay. So, all right. So we did, as Fon was saying earlier, we did a lot of effects in camp. That was Henry's intention. And again, we were shooting on film. We were shooting on old Mitchell cameras. And we had a bunch of legendary, effects people who had done camera effects for years at ILM and other places. So this was all around the couple of shots that center on Oogie Boogie falling apart. His skin, the sack coming off, and the bits of skin are the bugs that are there, and then the bugs falling apart. So we shot this high speed, so it would appear to be slow motion in the end. It was one of the few things we actually shot as a group. There'd be like 20 of us on a stage. That set was probably about 15 feet wide, maybe 20 feet wide. Had a nice little pool in the middle with plexiglass underneath it. It was full of methicil, which you would probably recognize as slime from Ghostbusters. It's used a lot in effects. It's a great snotty material. McDonald's used it to thicken their shakes for years. True. It's a story.
Really?
Yeah. So we threw hunks of dry ice in there. There was about 6 of us around the perimeter with like a 1-inch, surgical tube in our mouth. Another Chapman friend of mine, went to Chapman University friend of mine, Dave Jansen, was in that picture as well. He's blowing. We're all blowing through it to make bubbles and to get that kind of lava, look in the bottom of the thing. And then for the bug shots, I'm standing on top, dropping just like 400 bugs into the soup, for one shot, and then we have to reset. So then I have to clear out all the bugs out of the methicil, rinse them off, dry them off. So it was one of those things. We got about 1 shot a day on this. So it was most of the day of prepping, and then about 4 or 5 o'clock we get a call that the funny thing is, in that show, there was no walkie-talkies on that show. We had a pager system that went around the whole building, so all day long you were hearing like, line 4 for Henry, or Fon, can you come to the office? So it was like nonstop. Right. So all of a sudden we got called in there to do that, and it was about an hour of the day at the end for like a week that we'd all get together and and action, speed. The things rotating, people are blowing bubbles, people are dropping bugs. It was great. It was a real team effort, and that was, again, kind of reinforced that whole vibe. So, yeah.
So next time you're watching that sequence, I guess we can all think about what went into it.
Each bubble is actuated by a real human.
Well, and this is a much different scale here in this picture, Fon.
Yeah, these were the claws for Oogie Boogie's lair, so they kind of hang out in the background. And the way we made these sets, we actually didn't have just one of each set. We actually made 2 complete Oogie Boogie's lairs, and they broke into sections so they could have different pieces shooting on different stages all at the same time. We had 24 stages going simultaneous, and we were lucky to get 1 minute a week. So we had replicas. We had at least 2 of every set. There were at least, I think, 7 Jack puppets.
Oh, yeah.
And then we had 2 complete Oogie Boogie's lairs. The fountain in the middle, we actually had 5 of each because a piece of the fountain was always visible from each piece of Halloween Town. So that's how we did all that. So when we had to do those claws, it was a lot of claws.
Any last thoughts on Nightmare Before Christmas? I want to make sure we get some time with Coraline before we open it up.
One last thought is when you were mentioning the bugs and the labor, we actually, the boards, Henry made sure that the boards were exact to what he wanted to do in the film. And so he would get upset if we put in candles and candle lights, and stuff. It'll make the shot too expensive. So, we had to be very careful with what we put in because everything was taken literally from the boards and built and shot. So, just a thought.
Okay, well, let's switch over to Coraline. And this is, we got some images of the armature that you were talking about a little bit before, Fon, but maybe you can, now there's a visual for most people, a little bit more about what goes into building these puppets.
Yeah, for Coraline, it was really interesting. While this character was getting designed, there were some innovations that needed to happen. There was a lot of back and forth because Coraline is a child, so that was going to be a small puppet, and then all the adults would be much bigger. So there were a lot of discussions between the animators and the puppet makers. They wanted to make Coraline smaller and smaller, and the animators wanted it to be bigger and bigger. We finally landed about 9 3/8 inches tall for Coraline. And it was also the first movie that we had ever done 3D printing for faces. So Coraline and some of the other characters in the movie had 3D printed faces. They would do all the animation in Maya, and then they would output every single frame of animation as a 3D print. And the challenge for the puppet makers was to make sure each of those were painted perfectly. They actually won a Technical Achievement Academy Award for the technique.
Yeah, and for those that can't see, there's, hundreds, it looks like, of little facial expression. And it looks like maybe just in pieces, the faces, like the top half and the bottom half were separately.
Yeah, Coraline had a top half and a bottom half, so they didn't have to make quite as many versions of each face. And then they did clean that up in CG afterwards. They would clean up that little seam.
Although it's interesting, talking about that kind of communal, Henry being open to suggestion, Henry sent an email out to the entire crew about, like 6 months before we actually started wrapping this thing, and asked us what our thoughts were. Should we leave the line in or the line out? And most of us, I voted leave the line in. You know what I mean? Let's show people what we're actually doing here. Which I think they ended up doing. Anomalisa, I think, maybe left that line in. I'm not sure, but it's been done since then. But they thought, it was Nike money, and it was their first project, and they wanted to succeed, so they thought that might be distracting. So they painted the line out on the face seams and everything, which was kind of a shame, I think. But.
Yeah, there was actually a huge departure in traditional stop motion between Coraline and Nightmare Before Christmas. Nightmare Before Christmas very much embraced the whole idea that it was handmade, so everything still had a very raw handmade quality. And then when we got to Coraline, they wanted it to be a lot more polished, but we were trying to make sure it wasn't so polished that it looked like a CG movie. So it was skating that line. But on Coraline, we had 48 stages, and we still got less than a minute a week.
62 stages.
62? Yeah, we ended up at 62.
By the end.
Wow.
Yeah, no, and I really like when you were talking, the mice, exactly. Just imagine how many of the mice they had to make if they made that many Coraline.
So the mice were also 3D printed. There were 45 mice in the scene. I know this because I did the initial storyboard, so I could say I'm a mouse choreographer. Or not storyboard, we did an animatic. I did that in my the mice and all the different Busby Berkeley dance number stuff that they ended up doing. And they had 5 animators on this for 5 months, is that right? Because they had to replace all 45 mice for every 24th of a second. And they had these massive spreadsheets, and each mouse, if you looked really close at them, had a little number on the back of their jacket. So they can keep track of which number goes where at which frame. It was insane.
Yeah.
And then it's just fun to see the sort of scale again of the house. I think there's one with a person in it. Tell us a little bit about the sets. That there were different houses, right, in the real world and the other world.
Yeah, Henry really wanted to play with the fact that this was getting shot in 3D. This was a really great technique that he came up with, which was I would build the set in the computer with just 90-degree walls, like a normal room, like you see here, and then Henry and Pete Kozacek, the DP, would come in. They'd pick a lens. They'd pick an establishing shot position for that space. And then I would take the back wall, for the real world, I would take the back wall, push it halfway into the room, but then shrink it so that all the lines still line up. So in 2D, it would look like a normal room, but in 3D, the wall is halfway into the room. So it was kind of this weird mind bender. And then for the other world, we would do the opposite. We would push the wall back and then enlarge it. I don't know if I got that right. It works in the computer. Anyway, so they would build, then we would create the designs based on those 2 different versions. So Otherworld is really distant, and Real World makes you feel a little claustrophobic and uncomfortable until the end of the movie, and then it's normal. So you can only see that in 3D. So if you get a chance to see the movie in 3D, you'll get a sense of all that. And the rest, and then they would. This broke the crew. The people that hadn't worked with Henry before, their brain would break when we talk about this stuff. Because after the establishing shot, Henry would just put the camera wherever he wanted. And everyone was just like, but then the forced perspective doesn't work. And he's like, yeah. And that's that uncanny feeling you get when you watch the movie, is because you're breaking a forced perspective. It's supposed to work. Anyway, that's really cool.
It certainly fits in. And so, I've got a couple other pictures of the other sets here, but since everyone earlier, I want to make sure we have time to get to the tunnel effect, because that does really stand out as something that is amazing. And so tell us a little bit more about your work on that. Now, 15 years later, ponytail Fon.
The portal was actually something I got to design. It was in my office. I had built a big foam core box. I put a hole in it, and that was going to be where I tried different materials to make the portal out of. I put 3 Christmas tree color wheels in there that had the purple, pink, and blue lights so it would move around. And I would test different materials. Everything that I did, this was in my office for about 9 months. I didn't work on it continuously for 9 months, but apparently it's like having a baby. I had to try different materials whenever I was not designing something else. And Henry would say, well, that one looks too man-made. That one looks really gross. That one looks too much like fabric. And it was really challenging. And finally, one day I was looking at the sketch, and the original artist that conceptualized the portal kind of drew these squiggles like this. And I was like, how could I get squiggles in 3D? And I realized I could take a spiderweb gun that shoots hot glue and makes spider webs. And then I just did an armature out of aluminum, so it was still animatable, and then sprayed it with the spiderweb gun, and it made these great kind of scallops throughout it. Wherever the armature wire was close together, it would just a little bit, and then wherever it was wide, it would go in further. But yeah, so the portal's made of hot glue.
Okay.
And sorry, just one more quick story. Because I had this giant box in my office with the portal in it, it was actually really beautiful with the moving lights and things. It was a very stressful movie. It was the first feature film that Leica Entertainment had ever done. And the tensions were so high, I would get a knock on my door, and someone would go, "Hey, Fon, can I borrow your portal?" And they would come in and just hang out with their head inside the box.
I like that little zen.
For a couple minutes. I always felt like I should be playing some new age music or something.
Yeah.
They'd always leave refreshed and go, "Thank you so much."
So funny. Kirk, can you tell us a little bit about the void in between the two?
Yeah, that was actually quite a bit of a setup because it was trying to shoot something in complete void, a complete white area. So we ended up having to create like a site that was probably about 40 foot long and curved around into a full, 180-degree circle or half semicircle. The deck was made of plexiglass, so that you couldn't see. You could see through it, but you didn't. It was everything kind of faded away in the end. And there was a lot of testing being done. Kind of the inspiration for that was who was the original concept designer on that? I'm sorry, I've totally forgotten his name.
Yeah, I can't remember right now.
But a lot of the kind of granular looks to the trees that are kind of very angular with little bits of confetti on the end of them. That was all that look. That totally came from his concept design. Okay. So that was kind of the only place we really incorporated that look into it. But then there's the shot of me later standing next to the pink palace that's half gray and half pink, and that was a process of us. We actually had to paint that in camera, frame by frame, to kind of have that that kind of graying out quality to that building as it happened.
So real quick, last few slides so we can get to any audience questions. Just because we mentioned this earlier, the proportions of being able to hold herself up. Is this similar to the rig that you were talking about for using for Sally?
Yeah, they give her
the
bigger
very small
boots.
ankles. Yeah, okay. And then we've got the doll here. And a couple last sets. I assume the ghost children were a similar Pepper's Ghost sort of illusion as Zero that you explained earlier, or
that and some of it was shot in UV to kind of give it kind of a glowing effect. So we did several approaches on the ghost kids to get that look to them. So
cool. And then Kirk, you sent along a couple of resources in terms of people who love Nightmare Before Christmas might want to learn more. So I threw those up.
Yeah. There's a great podcast. Todd Lookinland, who worked with Fon in the set shop. Kat Miller, now Allie Ocean, was a coordinator in Puppets, I think. The two of them have a probably 40-episode series called We Know Jack that's on Apple Plus and into streamers. You can look at that. Hour-long interviews with various people who worked on the show. Yeah. And then 3 books that have kind of come out recently. One is called Tales from the Pumpkin King's Cameraman. That was written by Pete Kazachek prior to his passing about a year ago. All about his experience in the film industry, but he was a director of photography on Corpse Bride, on Night Before Christmas, and Coraline, and a lot of other things. So it's a great story. There's also another Nightmare visual aid. Dave Bossert wrote that. And it's got some new interviews in it, some new photos in it. And then former animator, story guide, director at Disney, Steve Anderson, just wrote a book called Disney In Between, kind of the years of Disney after Walt died up to 86 that Jorgen's mentioned in a few times. So anyway, if you're curious about any of these things, check them out. Keep going.
So we've still got a couple of minutes for audience Q&A. But anyone have a question for our panel? Yes, you in the black master.
Do you have any interesting stories about things that didn't quite go according to plan?
No.
What do you mean? Everything went perfect. Actually, I have a plan that I schemed that didn't go as I had hoped it would be. When we were working on Nightmare Before Christmas, the scene shop was doing Lock, Shock, and Barrel's interior house, and I wanted very, very badly to work on that. I thought it was really cool. I was jealous of everyone working on it. And I was instead assigned the task of doing a snowscape in this room they called the foam room, and it was at the very, very far end of the facility, and it smelled like burning polystyrene. And it was very like you were just in isolation, basically, if you got sent to this room. So I went back there, and I was doing a snowscape, and I was like, I really want to work on Lock, Shock, and Barrel, so I'm going to go as fast as I can. And so I did this snowscape, and I made sure I nailed the storyboard art and the look of all of it perfectly, and then I got my boss and brought him over, and he goes, wow, this is perfect, first try, and you're so fast. We're going to give you all the snowscapes. And I didn't work on Lock, Shock, and Barrel's house.
Yes, in the red shirt. Okay, yeah, so the question is, how are the Christmas lights in Christmas Town done based on the information we had earlier?
Those they have these tiny railroad model light bulbs that we would use for all that kind of stuff, and then we'd sleeve a little thing over it to make it shaped like a Christmas bulb. and they were called
Grain of wheat.
grain of wheat
Yeah.
was one size. They also had grain of rice and grain of sand. It was even smaller. But there are 12-volt light bulbs that you could get for railroad models.
Christmas lights were actually lit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Even the Christmas lights, even the Halloween style Christmas lights in Halloween Town were practical. But I do want to point out, though, that one of the benefits and one of the real milestones to Nightmare in stop motion is the use of motion control camera work in that. Which, if you know that, basically it's a camera on a giant robotic arm that allows you to program a move. So the animators work on a performance as they go, and they hit go, and the camera moves to the next position. The benefit to that, it's been used a lot at ILM or in other places for various model effects, is that you can shoot the same shot 4 or 5 times on the same hunk of film. So you will shoot it for the animation, you'll shoot it for the hero lighting, and then you'll turn everything off except for the Christmas lights, and shoot the same shot again, minus the animation, just to pick up that element. And then in post, you can kind of play with the levels on that. So that's why they can brighten or glow or at certain points.
Unfortunately, you're out of time. I see lots of questions, but please do come chat with us afterwards in the hallway if the guys can stick around. I'm so sorry we didn't get to everybody. I'm going to do my best to get this slideshow up. I've got a QR code if you want to watch it later. Thank you so much to our panelists for being here and all the fans. Thank you so much. That's it for this bonus episode of Star Warsologies. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks to all of you who came to LA Comic-Con to see us. I hope you enjoy this panel just in time for spooky season. Next up, we'll have a bonus episode that has the Los Angeles Comic-Con panel about the 25th anniversary of Galaxy Quest. So stay tuned for that.